She said it before I'd even taken my hat off, before I'd had a chance to explain why I was standing on her porch at dusk, with mud on my boots and nothing but a stranger's directions in my pocket. She stood in that doorway with her arms crossed and her jaw set like stone, and she looked at me the way a woman looks at something she's already decided to stop wanting. "You'll leave like all the others," she said, and her voice didn't shake. It didn't soften. It landed like a closed door. I didn't know yet that she was right about the leaving, but she was wrong about everything else. My name is Caleb Merritt, and I had no business being in Harlan County that autumn. I was 31 years old, drifting south from Montana after a cattle drive that had gone sideways, with $40 in my coat pocket and no particular plan beyond reaching warmer ground before the first hard freeze. My horse threw a shoe outside Danner's Creek, and a man at the livery, a wide fellow with a red beard named Pruitt, told me I might find work at the Whitfield Ranch, 6 miles east on the main road. "Farmer by the name of Whitfield," Pruitt said, not looking up. "Lost 2 hands to the rail camps last month. His wife's been running the place near on her own. They'll take a man who knows cattle." What Pruitt did not tell me, and what I reckon he knew full well, was that Thomas Whitfield had ridden to Abilene 4 days prior and wouldn't be back for a week. Twant. He also didn't mention that a long line of drifters before me had shown up at that gate, with their eyes fixed on the farmer's wife in a way that had nothing to do with honest work. I didn't know any of that when I rode up between the cottonwood trees as the last daylight bled out of the western sky. I only knew what I saw. Her name was Eliza Whitfield, and she was standing on the porch with a lantern in one hand and a look on her face that could have stopped a buffalo at 30 yards. She was tall, with dark chestnut hair pulled back at the base of her neck, a few loose strands catching the wind off the prairie. Her eyes were the color of creek water in shadow, gray, with a depth that made you want to look longer than was polite. So she wore a dark blue work dress and a canvas apron that told you she'd been working since before the sun came up and had no intention of stopping. Her jaw was sharp, her brow steady, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that made it clear she'd been carrying a great deal for a long time and had learned to carry it without bending. I was exactly what I looked like, a road-worn drifter in a brown coat, with dark hair going long under a trail-beaten hat, and green eyes that hadn't seen proper rest in 3 days. I was broad through the chest and lean everywhere else, with hands that knew rope and fence post. Not much to look at after 6 miles of prairie road. But I was standing on her porch, and she was waiting. "Mrs. Whitfield," I said. "No, that's right. Man at the livery. Pruitt said your husband might be looking for a hand. My name's Caleb Merritt. I know cattle, I know fences, and I won't cause you any trouble." She looked at me for a long moment, not a quick appraisal, but something slower, like she was reading a book she'd read before and already knew how it ended. Then she said it. "You'll leave like all the others. If you're enjoying this story, take a second right now and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to us. Drop a comment letting us know what city you're watching from. We'll leave a little heart on every single one." Now, back to Caleb and Eliza. I didn't argue with her. I'd learned early that arguing with a woman who's made up her mind is about as useful as arguing with weather. Instead, I said, "Yes, ma'am, I likely will. Most men do. But until then, I'll give you an honest day's work for an honest wage, and I won't bother you with anything beyond that." Something shifted in her expression. Barely. Like a curtain moving when there's no wind you can see. She stepped aside and nodded toward the barn. "There's a bunk in the back left corner. Supper's already been put away, but there's cornbread on the shelf above the stove. You start at first light." I touched my hat. "Much obliged, ma'am." She went inside without another word and closed the door. I stood there a moment in the dark, with my horse blowing steam beside me and the prairie pressing in from every direction. And I thought, this is going to be a strange week. I had no idea. The Whitfield Ranch was solid and well kept, in the way that tells you the people who own it care about it. 30 head of cattle in the east pasture, 4 horses in the paddock, a tight dry barn, and a kitchen garden turned under for the season. The bunk was real. Rope frame, wool blanket, a straw mattress better than what I'd been sleeping on for 2 weeks. I was up before the sky went gray. I fed and watered the horses, checked the north fence where a section of posts looked soft, moved 3 cows that had found a weak spot in the east gate, split a cord of wood that had been sitting in rounds all fall, and had the water barrel filled by 6:30. When Eliza came out with 2 cups of coffee, she stopped when she saw the wood pile. She walked over and handed me one of the cups without a word. It was strong and black and exactly right. North fence needs new posts from the bend to the cottonwood corner, I said. I can get to it today if you have lumber. There's a pile behind the smokehouse, she said. Left from when Thomas built the chicken coop. A pause. He never did get to the fence. I nodded and left it at that. That was the whole of our conversation for the first 2 days. She was not cold. She was contained, like a river that knows its banks. She brought meals to the back step when it was time, gave instructions without waste, and kept herself at a precise distance that felt less like suspicion and more like a rule she'd made for herself and intended to keep. I respected it. I'd been around enough loneliness to know what it looked like when it was being managed. Then, around the 3rd day, something shifted. It was the horse that did it. One of the mares, a gray with a white blaze that Eliza called Mabel, had been off her feed since I arrived. 3rd morning, I found her favoring her left foreleg, a deep stone bruise in the frog of the hoof, going on long enough that she'd started to compensate in ways that would cause her real trouble later. I cleaned it, packed it with drawing salve from the tack room, and wrapped it proper. When Eliza came out and saw, she stood at the paddock rail with her hands folded on the top bar, something new on her face. Not softness exactly, more like the moment before softness. "She's been off since July," Eliza said. "Thomas thought she was just being contrary." "She's not contrary," I said. "She's been hurting." Eliza looked at me directly. Really looked. Well, the way she'd been carefully not doing since I arrived. "How long before she's right?" "Week, maybe 2. She'll be fine." Eliza nodded. Then, so quietly, I nearly missed it. "Thank you." I didn't make anything of it. I went back to the fence. But that evening, instead of leaving a plate on the back step and going inside, she sat down on the porch steps with her own plate and ate supper in the open air. She didn't invite me to join her, and I didn't assume. I sat on the fence rail 20 feet away while the sun went down over the prairie, and she stayed on those steps until the last color left the sky, and we were both quiet in the same direction. It was the most company I'd had in a long time. By the 4th day, I understood why she'd said what she said when I arrived. Thomas Whitfield was not a cruel man, but he was absent in the particular way some men are absent, present in body but elsewhere in mind, always working toward something just over the next hill. The ranch was his dream, but the living of it had fallen to Eliza. She planted the garden, managed the hands when there were any, kept the accounts and the stores and the calendar. 8 years of it. She'd gotten very good at it, and it had cost her something she probably didn't have a name for. The drifters who'd come before me had all left. She was alone either way. The fence still needed mending, and the only thing she could count on was herself. I understood that more than she knew. I'd spent 12 years moving from one job to the next, telling myself that motion was freedom. What I hadn't admitted yet, what that week on the Whitfield Ranch was beginning to pry loose from somewhere deep in my chest, was that I was tired. Not the kind that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from never stopping long enough to matter to anyone. On the 5th night, it rained hard. The driving kind that comes off the plains horizontal and shakes the barn walls. I was inside settling the horses when I heard a sharp crack from the back pasture, followed by the low, alarmed sound of cattle beginning to move. I was out the door before I'd finished the thought. The rain hit me like a wall. I found the break in the fence, a whole section down in the mud, and started turning the cattle back. I was knee-deep in wet grass, working a length of rope to close the gap when a lantern appeared beside me, and I turned, and Eliza was there in a long oilskin coat with water streaming off her hat brim, already looping rope around the nearest standing post without being asked. We worked side by side for the better part of an hour, not speaking except for the short, practical things. Left side, hold this, that post'll hold. When we finally had it lashed enough to keep the cattle in, we stood together in the wet dark while the rain began to ease. She was breathing hard. So was I. The lantern threw a small circle of gold around us both, and beyond it, there was nothing but dark prairie and rain smell and the distant lowing of settling cattle. You didn't have to come out, I said. This is my ranch, she said. Just that. We walked back to the barn together to get out of the rain, and we stood inside dripping on the hay. And for a long moment, neither of us moved to go. Why did you come here, really? She asked. Same reason I said. Looking for work. Pruitt sent you. He mentioned it, yes. She was quiet a moment. Pruitt's been sending men here all season. Every one of them shows up with that look. What look? She turned her head toward me. You know what look. I didn't deny it. I'm not looking at you any way I shouldn't be. No, she said, and there was something careful in how she said it. You're not. That's what I can't quite figure out about you, Caleb Merritt. I looked at the lantern for a while. The rain had softened to a steady hiss on the roof. You said I'd leave like all the others, I said after a while. You will. Maybe, I paused. Does that bother you? She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, it used to. I got over it. I don't think you're as over it as you reckon, I said, not unkindly. She looked at me, and something moved across her face that she pulled back before it could become anything I could name. You don't know me, Mr. Merritt. No, ma'am. But I know what a person looks like when they've given up expecting anything from anybody. And I know it ain't the same thing as not wanting it. The silence that followed was different from all the ones before it. She picked up the lantern and stepped toward the door. There's dry clothes in the trunk in the bunk room, she said. Get out of those wet things before you catch your death. She left. I stood there in the dark barn for a while, listening to the rain ease off, and I thought about how a man can ride 10,000 miles and still end up standing in the one place that feels like something he'd forgotten the shape of. The next morning was clear and cold, the sky washed pale blue, and the grass still glittering with last night's rain. I was back at the barn by noon when I heard her from the house. Caleb. First time she'd used my given name. I went to the porch. She was standing in the doorway with a look I hadn't seen on her yet. Not the guarded distance of the first days, but something open and uncertain at the same time. And the combination on Eliza Whitfield's face did something to me I hadn't been expecting. Thomas will be home tomorrow, she said. I know. You've done good work this week, better than I expected. I appreciate that, ma'am. She looked at me directly. Don't do that. Ma'am? Don't ma'am me right now. I'm trying to say something. I waited. She chose her words the way you choose your footing on uncertain ground. I haven't slept well in a long time. This week I have. I don't know why I'm telling you that, except that I think you ought to know it, because you won't be here much longer, and I won't say it after you're gone. Eliza, I said. It was the first time I'd said it. She didn't correct me. Don't, she said quietly. Don't say anything kind. I can't afford it right now. I wasn't going to say anything kind, I said. I was going to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you've had to carry all this on your own. I'm sorry that the men who should have lightened that load didn't. I'm sorry that when I rode up, your first thought was to brace yourself. I paused. No, that ain't right for a woman like you. She held my gaze, her eyes bright in a way that had nothing to do with the morning light. What kind of woman am I then? The kind that deserves more than she's been given, I said, and knows it, and keeps going anyway. We didn't touch. I want to be clear about that. Nothing crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. But we sat on that porch for 2 hours while the morning warmed around us, and we talked the way people talk when they've stopped pretending they don't want to, about how she'd come here as a bride of 22 with a heart full of the future, and found that the future was mostly fence posts and quiet loneliness. About how she'd learned to love the prairie on her own terms, even when it pressed in from all sides like something that wanted to erase you. So about how there were mornings she rode out to the East Ridge just to have somewhere that felt like it belonged only to her. I talked too, more than I usually did, about 12 years of moving job to job, season to season, telling myself that motion was freedom. What I hadn't admitted yet was that I was tired. The deep kind. The kind that has nothing to do with sleep, and everything to do with never belonging anywhere long enough for it to matter. She listened the way she did everything. Completely. Without performance. With a focus that made you feel like what you were saying was worth the air it took. By the time noon came and we both stood up out of habit, something had changed between us that was quiet and total and impossible to put back. She looked at me from the doorway. You're still going to leave, she said. Yes, when your husband gets home. And then? I turned my hat in my hands and looked out at the prairie. I don't know, I said finally. First time in a long time I've said that, and meant something by it. She almost smiled. It was the first time I'd seen anything close to it, and it did more damage to my composure than anything else that week. She caught herself and looked away. I put my hat on and went back to the barn. Before you hear the rest, if you've made it this far, this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel right now and drop a comment letting us know what city you're watching from. We read every single one, and we'll leave you a little heart. Now let's finish what Caleb started. Thomas Whitfield returned the following afternoon on a gray gelding, satisfied with a good deal made somewhere south of here. He was a broad, weather-worn man of about 45 with a generous face. Not unkind, but the kind who had stopped paying attention somewhere along the way. The way a man stops hearing a sound once he's heard it long enough. He shook my hand firmly, looked over my fence work with genuine appreciation, and told Eliza she'd found a good one this time. She was standing on the porch with her arms at her sides, and that face she wore, contained even. He found us, actually, she said. Thomas clapped me on the shoulder and offered me winter work if I wanted to stay on. I looked past him at Eliza. She was looking at the middle distance, and I could see in the set of her jaw exactly what it cost her to stand there. Not because she wanted anything she shouldn't have, but because she'd had, for 1 week, and something that made her feel like herself again. The feeling of being seen, heard, valued for what she carried rather than having it taken for granted. And now she was watching it return to the ordinary. And the ordinary was harder to bear when you knew what else was possible. I appreciate the offer, I said to Thomas. Your wife's been running this place well. Better than most would. Thomas nodded absently and said something about the horses. I said nothing more. That night, I packed my gear in the bunk room and lay on that rope mattress one last time, looking up at the rafters while the wind came off the prairie. For the first time in a long time, being good at something, at passing through without leaving a mark, felt like a failure. I was saddled and ready at first light. Thomas waved me off with honest warmth. He was not a bad man, and I want to be fair to that. Eliza came out as I was pulling the cinch tight and walked across the yard with her usual purpose, stopping 6 feet from me. "Much obliged," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Don't forget Mabel's foot needs rechecking in a week," she said. "The wrap will need changing before then. Tell whoever you get next. Should be straightforward." "I will." We stood there in the early cold, and the prairie was vast and quiet all around us, the sky the color of pale fire along the eastern edge. "You were right," I said. "I'm leaving like all the others." She held my gaze. "I know, but not for the same reason." Something in her expression shifted, just barely, just enough. "I know that too," she said. I put my boot in the stirrup and swung up. I settled my hat, gathered the reins, and looked down at her one last time. She looked back up without flinching, without softening, without any of the things that would have made it easier or harder. She was the most honest thing I had seen in 12 years of riding. "Eliza," I said. "Caleb," she said. I turned my horse and rode. I made it about 4 miles before I pulled up on the ridge east of the ranch and sat there a long time, looking back at the ribbon of smoke rising from the chimney in the pale morning. I could see the green pastures and the gray fence line I'd repaired, and the barn, and the small figure of a woman standing on a porch that wasn't mine. I thought about Thomas waving me off with goodwill. I thought about the line a man has to hold, the one between what he wants and what he owes to the world. I'd held it. I was proud of that, even when it didn't feel like much. There are things you can take from a person, and things you can't. And some of the things you can't take are the ones you most want to carry. I rode on. Not south, though. I turned north and east, toward a town called Callaway's Crossing, where I'd heard there was winter range work and decent wages. It wasn't a plan, it was a direction. And for the first time in 12 years, the direction felt like it had weight, like I was riding toward something, rather than away from everything. I won't tell you I went back. This kind of story is honest before it is comfortable. Son Thomas Whitfield lived, and the ranch endured, and the prairie kept going the way the prairie does, indifferent to the small fires that burn and go out in the lives of the people crossing it. What I will tell you is that I stopped drifting that winter. I took the work at Callaway's Crossing and stayed through the spring, and when the owner offered me a share in the place if I'd commit to running it through the next 2 seasons, I said yes. It was the first yes to staying I'd said in longer than I could remember. I can't say why, exactly. Can't say what it is about 1 week on a stranger's ranch, repairing a stranger's fence, watching a strong woman tend a hard life with steady grace, that changes the way a man sees himself. But something in me had shifted, like a compass that had been spinning a long time finally finding north. I thought about her sometimes, the way you think about something that showed you what was true. Not with aching longing, but with the kind of tenderness that comes from knowing you were trusted with something valuable, even if only for a moment. She had let me see her, really see her, past the walls she'd built so high and well, and I had not abused that. I had honored it the only way I knew how, by leaving when I should have, and carrying what she'd shown me forward into the life I was finally learning to build. The prairie is a hard country. It takes from you and gives back on its own terms, without apology and without explanation. The people who last in it are the ones who learn to hold both things at once, what they want and what they can have, what they feel and what they can say. Eliza Whitfield had been holding that balance for years. She was better at it than most. I think about the smoke from that chimney sometimes. The way it rose straight up in the cold morning air, with nothing around it for miles, small and steady and entirely its own. Burning without witness, burning just the same. That was her. And I was the man who rode past once, close enough to feel the warmth, and had the sense to keep his hands to himself and the grace to be grateful. She said I'd leave like all the others. She was right. But not a single one of the others, I reckon, carried her with them the way I did. And maybe that's the only kind of staying that ever really lasts. Thanks for riding through this one all the way to the end. If this story hit you somewhere real, Fohan, subscribe to the channel right now and drop a comment letting us know what city you're watching from. We'll put a little heart on every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves out there and look twice at the people carrying more than you can see.